everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of TLD HER, the podcast. I am your host, Devin Penny. I'm a certified self-development coach and author, and I'm here to have conversations that feel authentic and open and that are also valuable and hopefully pretty concise with women in their 20s about what it was like to be in my 20s and what I think I learned, what I think I would do differently if I had the opportunity, what I wish I learned sooner. Yeah, really, so that we can get to know each other and connect on a deeper level, and that women in their 20s feel like they have a space to come hang out and hear things that are hopefully helpful. This week's episode is on a topic that I could talk about every day for the rest of my life because I think it is that important and because I think the messaging around it is so confusing and doesn't need to be. Boundaries. Let's talk about boundaries. My first viral video on TikTok was about boundaries. I had lots of conversations in the comments. I had lots of requests on which boundaries needed the most attention. And it really opened my eyes to seeing that so many people are not only uncomfortable by setting boundaries, but that they really don't know what they are, what they're used for, or how to enforce them and use them in a way that is not only productive, but that is not exhausting. It does not have to be such a chore to enforce your boundaries. And if you had parents who talked about boundaries, if you had people around you who were good at enforcing boundaries and who passed that along to you, you are one of the lucky ones, because I don't think that it's something that was very consciously taught to many people. It took me 25 years to figure out what a boundary actually was, and another to know how to enforce them. So hopefully I'm going to speed this process up for you on some level. And again, like I said, this is a conversation that I could have for years and days and months and weeks. So we're just going to skim the surface today. But I feel like it's really important to just start the conversation. And as always, if you have any sort of follow-up questions or want to have conversations, DM me, email me, however you want to get in touch with me. I'm here. Firstly, I think the most important thing to know about a boundary is that it is not a wall to keep people out. It is a wall and a barrier to keep your energy in. So when you think about it that way, it changes, I think, the discourse that goes on in our head about how to set boundaries. It doesn't have to be harsh. It doesn't have to be about, no, you can't come near me. It doesn't have to be about, this is my personal space, do not cross the boundary, otherwise I'm going to flip out. It can just be about, what is worth my energy expenditure in conversations, in relationships, in situations, in my yeses and my nos. What kind of energy am I not only willing, but also able to give in this situation? And when I am giving more energy than I can, that I am physically, mentally, emotionally capable of, how do I rein it in? So knowing this is about you and not necessarily about others is where boundaries really begin. It is about keeping you safe, keeping you feeling good about the way that you're interacting with the world around you, not so much about keeping other people accountable, holding other people to a certain standard, etc. It's about holding yourself to a standard and knowing that you are the one who is going to create and enforce your boundaries, and that a lot of people, mostly the people that we love the most, are probably not going to be as receptive, especially at the beginning, to some of the boundaries that you are creating and enforcing. Not because they don't want you to have boundaries, but because it means that a different version of you than they have had for all of these years is showing up, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. But it is not anyone else's responsibility to uphold your boundary. It is your responsibility to uphold your boundary. Other people are going to push back. Other people are going to cross lines. Other people are going to say, I don't really like that rule that you just made, and I'm not going to follow it. There are situations that you will be in plenty of times where someone does not respect and or uphold, enforce your boundary, and they don't have to. You have to be willing to walk away from situations and people who are not people who are honoring your boundaries, whatever those may be, if that is the situation. So being clear about what your boundaries are is what's important, because that's what you're going to stand on. You are the one who is going to have to survey certain situations and say, are my boundaries needed here? For example, I go over to my parents' house, they say something that I don't like. I then have an opportunity to either say, is this time for me to enforce a boundary? Or is this something that I don't really care about and can let go? Where is my energy being expended? Are they trying to bait me into a conversation? Are they saying things that are disrespectful? Are they saying things that are rude or that are something that I don't want to partake in conversation in? Or are things manageable? When things become unmanageable is when you enforce a boundary. So in that same example, if something is being said that I feel is rude or disrespectful to myself, to others, I don't want to be a part of the conversation. I then have two options. I can physically remove myself from the space, or I can give a warning that I am going to physically remove myself from this space. That oftentimes is a very simple conversation. Hey, I don't really love this conversation, and if it continues, I'm just going to get up and take a walk. That is a boundary, period. It does not have to be combative. It does not have to be mean. It does not have to be nice. Boundaries themselves are not ultimatums, but enforcing your boundary in real time might sound like an ultimatum. We can either change the subject or I'm going to leave. And honestly, that's okay. If you leave, the world keeps turning, things keep going. That has to be your truth. The difficulty in enforcing boundaries is that, let's say you do say something along the lines of, I'm not comfortable with this conversation. If it continues, I'm going to get up and walk away. And someone says to you, you're so sensitive. We're going to talk about this because this is my house. Whatever the case is, I've heard it all. It's then up to you to actually uphold that boundary. And instead of fight back and forth with the person about why they should respect your boundary in that moment, it is on you to actually, if the conversation continues or if the conversation gets heated and goes in a different direction, goes south, that you actually get up and you walk away. That is where I see the most error in boundary setting. It's not that people's boundaries are unreasonable. It's not that people are too sensitive. It's not that people aren't good at saying, this is my boundary. It's that people aren't great at upholding a boundary, especially when they feel disrespected by someone else. However, again, this is about you. This is about you expending your time, your energy in a way that feels good to you. So with that being said, you know that there is no way that it feels better at any point in time to argue through a boundary than it does to just enforce one. And because people are not responsible for upholding your boundary, it is very common that they are going to push back. What can I get away with? What is this conversation really? What can I do to get a rise out of you? Are you actually going to leave? Let me test that. To be clear, not everybody is antagonistic when they're crossing a boundary. Some people genuinely don't know and are willing to respect the boundary as soon as it's brought up. However, there are many people in all of our lives that are combative when it comes to boundaries and not wanting to be told what to do or what you'll do as a consequence to their actions. So knowing that, it is on you to be really clear about what your boundaries are. Really clear about what your boundaries are. And sometimes we don't really know our boundaries until they come up in the moment and we're like, oh, this is someone crossing a line with me. It is in that moment that you then have to decide whether or not you are going to enforce your boundary. The more often that you do this, the easier it gets. And I will say this, I'm okay walking away from situations that are not good for me. That is what boundaries help you do. They're not to keep people out. They're not to keep people from having conversations. They're just removing yourself from situations where you feel like this is not the right situation for me to be in. And whether you do that verbally or emotionally, mentally, physically is up to you. But it is so imperative that you understand that your boundaries are not always going to be upheld and respected by other people, and that is your responsibility. So that's the first order of business, is understanding what your boundaries are and getting really clear about those things so that when you are in moments where you feel like you need to enforce a boundary, that you are okay to do so, and that you also feel strong enough to walk away from the situation, not because you're putting a wall up around yourself, because you are keeping your energy in. So every week before I record a podcast, I put up a questions box for people to write in questions for the podcast or topics that they want to talk about. And this week, obviously, we were talking about boundaries, and I asked people what they needed help setting boundaries with. I'm just going to give examples of how to enforce a boundary in each of these situations. So the number one thing is needing help enforcing boundaries with parents. Here's the reason why it is tricky to enforce boundaries with parents. And I said this a little bit before. Your parents know a very specific version of you. And it is probably the version of you that they curated to a certain extent. It's the version of you that helped around the house and always hugged all of your relatives and was a good girl and got straight A's and did all the things that your parents wanted you to do. And now, as an adult, looking back on those things, when you start to realize what isn't working in your life, which is being good for everybody else, and you want to enforce a boundary, it's going to be difficult to do so with the people who created this version of you to begin with, because it's different. Now you have a different story, a different narrative. You are not being good for them anymore just to keep the peace. And that's really hard. It's really hard, I'm sure, to be a parent and to all of a sudden feel like there is this big change happening within your child. However, again, it is not your responsibility to be emotionally taking care of the people who you are enforcing boundaries with. This is about you emotionally taking care of yourself. And boundaries, I cannot state this enough, are not mean, are not rude, are not nasty, are not anything other than this is where my line is. And if you can't respect my line, I'm okay with moving away from this situation, this conversation in general. There were a lot of people when my video went viral on TikTok asking about no contact with parents, how to go there, when to know if you do need to go there. And the answer is you know your situation best. There are so many rules around all of this, and they're only applicable if they're applicable, if that makes sense. I'm not sitting in your household. I don't know what people are saying to you. I don't know how your parents act. I don't know how your parents react. I just know that if you feel like you are being constantly disrespected by someone or constantly talked down to or are not being emotionally supported or listened to or heard, there are so many different dynamics. If you feel like it is time to go no contact with your parents, that is a boundary that you need to be okay with setting. In that, I will also say there were so many people who, when I said this next part, didn't really realize that this was an option. But it's okay to create space and distance and not have that be a permanent thing. If you need to take some time off from your parents and from your family members, if you want to explain to them that that's what's happening, fine. And if not, then it's your prerogative. This is your life, and these are your rules. And that is what's important about understanding your boundaries and how to enforce them, is that everybody has a different threshold. And when your parents' threshold is different than what yours is, which it probably inevitably will be, and they don't understand your boundaries, it does not mean that they don't want to understand you and want to love you through that. It's just that they probably aren't very capable of doing that. We don't know why. A myriad of reasons. Again, a million different scenarios, a million different households, a million different ways that people were raised, etc. All in all, setting boundaries with parents is difficult, but it makes things less difficult when you start to think about it from that perspective that I was talking about earlier. The perspective of this is to conserve my energy for the things that matter to me and not to continue to put out so much energy into this one situation that doesn't feed me in any way, that doesn't fuel anything in my life, that doesn't fulfill anything for me, that just constantly drains me. Having open conversations with your parents is obviously the first step in all of this. However, we know that with parents, that doesn't always go the way we want it to. So, gauging the situation as it is and understanding that you're not wrong for wanting to set boundaries. You are not wrong for having boundaries. It doesn't mean they were bad parents. It doesn't mean that you love them less. It doesn't mean anything other than this is the amount of energy that I have to give to the world at this moment in time. And you over here are taking up so much of it that I have to lessen the amount that I'm giving to you. That's all. So, getting over the guilt hump of that, I think sometimes is the hardest part. And then again, just being really clear about what your boundaries are and being okay to enforce them. If that means getting up from the dinner table and walking away when there's a conversation happening, it doesn't have to be in a huff. It doesn't have to be a scene. It can just be, I'm going to use the restroom. The more that you continue to enforce these boundaries, people are not stupid. People understand when someone continues to get up and leave a conversation when the conversation happens. If it is directly affecting you, of course, say something. But your actions speak louder than words. If you are not willing to be in the same room as certain conversations and certain people, etc., that is going to be something that becomes prominent and that most people will take note of and say, oh, okay, check. This is what she won't talk about. If I bring that up again, I know that she's going to leave the room or that she's not going to engage in this conversation. That's all we can do. So, moving on from the guilt of it, understanding that these are boundaries that are helpful. The biggest piece of this is recognizing that no healthy relationships exist without boundaries. Period. You will not have any good relationships in your life if you are just constantly bleeding energy out, having no consequence to any action, having conversations about anything, letting any single thing in your field, letting people speak to you any type of way, having moments of complete and total depletion because you're defending yourself or because something is being talked about that's taking up a lot of your energy and producing a lot of anxiety. All of those things, not worth it. It's not going to work with anyone in your life, your parents included, if you don't have boundaries that protect your energy. You will feel depleted forever if you do not have boundaries in every single relationship that you enter. The next most asked question was, how do I put boundaries up during sexual intimacy? This is so important. I want to have so many conversations about the way that we communicate about sex, during sex, after sex. It is hugely important. It is a confidence thing. It is a security thing. It is a boundaries thing. It's what's healthy for you. There need to be bigger, longer conversations about this. But for now, what I would say is that if you are putting yourself in a position where you feel like you are not enjoying physical intimacy with someone, it will hurt you in more ways than one. It will not be good for your soul, for your spirit, for your mental health, for your emotional health, and it will probably not be good for your physical health. So, giving yourself an opportunity to respect yourself enough to say, I like this. I don't like this. I want this. I don't want this. And being really clear about that is imperative to your overall health and wellness. That being said, there are ways to bring these things up in a way that doesn't feel so scary, so daunting, so controlling. Because I think, again, as women, this is our biggest fear. What if we turn him off when we say no? What if, because he expects X, Y, and Z from me and I don't give it, he leaves the relationship? There are so many things that go through our head. And then also, not for nothing, there's the physical threat. What if we say something and we don't really know this person, we piss them off enough and we don't know what their reaction is going to be? There's a lot of stuff to sift through and to think about. What I will say is the best thing you can possibly do for yourself in any single relationship, and I mentioned this in my last video, is create a clear, open line of communication. Standing up for yourself, having conversations, talking things through. That is who you want to be in a relationship, even if the other person is not receptive. You probably don't want to be with that person, but let's just say that the other person is not going to step up to the plate and create that clear line of communication, or is afraid to have these bigger, deeper conversations. You need to be the one, and again, be known for being the one who's going to have the direct conversation. If you are not enjoying sexual intimacy, if you are not finding pleasure in having sex with someone, there is a lot of reworking that needs to be done. Again, not just from the physical standpoint, but that is important. And you deserve to feel good and have pleasure and enjoy yourself in these moments in time, especially if someone else that you are sleeping with is having that enjoyability, that pleasure, getting the benefits and the perks of what this should be for the two of you as an experience. There is a level of necessity in this, again, where you need to be thinking about yourself from just a wellness perspective. And then there is the emotional aspect of this, which is if you don't say something now, how far are you willing to let that go until it crosses a line that is so much worse than what it is right now? Also, this is just part of the nature of having a sexual relationship with someone, is getting to know what they like and what they don't like, and vice versa. These are two people, maybe more, coming together to hopefully enjoy themselves. And again, to have pleasure and to have an experience that is not tainted with, I wish I said that, or that didn't feel good, or what do I do next if this happens? So do yourself a favor and again, be really clear about the kind of boundaries that you want to have. And you will emotionally feel it, you will physically feel it. If something feels wrong to you and someone crosses the line with you, speak up for yourself. I do not like when you do that. I'm not comfortable with that. I haven't tried that yet, so can we take it slow? Whatever you need to say in order to move forward in a way that feels good for you is how you need to handle that situation. And again, there are no healthy relationships that exist without boundaries. So just speak up. I want to do so much work on this just in general. This is such an important topic to me, is the pleasure of women and the guilt that comes along with that and the way that we don't communicate. There's so much. So we're definitely going to unpack that in many more episodes. But for right now, if you're in a situation where you need to put a boundary up while you are being sexually intimate with someone, just do it. Love yourself enough, respect yourself enough, have enough care and compassion for yourself to stand up for yourself and what you need to do in order to feel good, genuinely. Okay, and the last one I'm going to do is how to put up boundaries in work environments, with coworkers, with your boss. This was something that came up a lot when I was doing follow-up videos to that viral video, how to put up different boundaries with your boss especially, but also with your coworkers, people knowing your personal business, people calling you after work hours, feeling like you need to email someone at 9 o'clock at night, all of the things. So first and foremost, again, being clear about what your boundaries are. Do you care about working after hours? If you do, and if it's not part of the job description, then you have to be the one who turns your computer or your phone off or doesn't answer the email after a certain time. If it is left up to your boss, your client, your email to enforce your boundary, they're not going to do it. They want you to answer the email. It's going to make their life better. It's for their benefit. It is against your benefit. So you're the person who needs to enforce that boundary. And even if it's difficult, again, having the tough conversation. I'm off at 5 o'clock. That's the end of my workday. I'll see you all tomorrow. That is enough. It doesn't have to be that much more dramatic. It doesn't have to be something that's really daunting. It can just be an open, clear line of communication. So I think that that's first and foremost is, again, it's going to be up to you to enforce the boundaries and be clear about them. And I also think that because we live in this state of urgency and instant gratification, that we think that everything is the most important thing on the planet, especially when it comes to where we're getting paid and what we do for a living. But I will just assure you that 90% of things, maybe even 95% of things, are not urgent and do not require your attention right this second in this moment. So having some perspective and honestly giving yourself a chance to experience the kind of work-life balance that's going to work for you. That's not always 50-50. That's sometimes 80-20. That's sometimes 70-30. It needs to be something that works for you. And that gives you an opportunity to actually enjoy yourself in your place of work. So knowing that not everything is urgent and also understanding that no one else is going to enforce these boundaries for you, you're going to have to be the one who does it, are the two things that I think are most important. And I understand that it's difficult to speak to a boss or to coworkers. You don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to have people have a bad feeling about you. But again, no healthy relationship, even in the workplace, exists without having boundaries. It actually gives people a chance to respect you and to have your best interest, and for them to know that you're going to have their best interest as well. When we care for ourselves, it sends subliminal messaging to everyone around us that not only are we willing to take care of ourselves, but we will take care of you too. We understand the importance of you taking care of yourself. That is important to us. So yeah, that's just how I feel on the work front. Say what you need to say, be respectful about things, but really give a shit about yourself more than you do about anything else. I know that we have been so programmed to think that that is so selfish, but it's just that we are not good in any other way for the rest of the world when we're not good for ourselves. So if you are constantly expending energy, building up resentment, building up these feelings of, I hate this, I can't stand this place, I don't want to work for these people, they don't respect me, don't treat me the way that they should, that is going to ruin the experience that you're having, not only for yourself, but for the people around you. So just get ahead of it. Be someone who has firm boundaries in place about what you will and will not do. And again, there are job descriptions for a reason. Go back and read your job description and see what you're actually there for. And if you find yourself doing way above and beyond and feeling resentful, depleted, exhausted by it, rethink some things and have some conversations and be okay with the fact that you might not be your boss's favorite, but you'll be your favorite. And at the end of the day, this is what life is all about. Getting into bed with yourself, looking back on your day, looking at all the decisions you made, the conversations you have, and being able to sleep peacefully with a clear conscience about the way that you handled things. Not necessarily because everybody else is so happy with you, but because you're so happy with yourself. I get so fired up when I talk about this. I get passionate. Anyway, we've got a lot of work to do with the boundary situation, and I am here to work through all of it. But I think that this is a good start, and if I had one thing to leave you with, it would be that boundaries are for you and not for others. And I think we mistake that a lot of times. We think we're putting boundaries up to keep other people out. And really, we're putting boundaries up to keep our energy in. So that's all. Have a great week. I will see you next week. And as always, if you have more questions, conversations, etc., you know where to find me. I'm here all the time.